Everything about the prison smelled like metal and sweat. The echo of slamming gates followed Ethan as guards led him through endless concrete corridors. He had never been in trouble before, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Yet here he was, a man in his 30s with no criminal record, sentenced to 5 years for a financial crime he didn't commit. The world outside had been cold when he left it. But the cold inside these walls was different, sharper, like it wanted to cut him open. The other inmates watched him as he passed. Some smirked, others whispered. Ethan kept his eyes down. He didn't know their rules, but he already knew fear was one of them. That night, in the noisy chaos of the cell block, he was assigned to a tiny cell with a man everyone called Riker. Broad shoulders, dark eyes, and a calm stillness that made others step aside when he walked by. Rumor said Riker ran half the prison. Ethan tried to make himself small as he set his bedding on the upper bunk. "I'm not looking for trouble," he murmured. Riker didn't answer right away. He just kept doing push-ups by the wall, his muscles tense under the dim light. Finally, he said, "Then stay quiet, and trouble might not find you." His tone wasn't a threat, it was advice, but it chilled Ethan anyway. That first night, cries echoed from other cells. Metal clanged. Somewhere, someone screamed, and a guard shouted for silence. Ethan couldn't sleep. Every noise felt like a warning. Then, over the sounds of the prison, he heard Riker's low voice. "Don't show fear," Riker said without looking up. "They smell it." Ethan wanted to ask who they were but couldn't speak. He just nodded. For some reason, Riker's presence made him feel safer, even though he didn't understand why. There was something in that stillness that felt deliberate, protective. He wondered what kind of man Riker really was, and why he seemed to care whether Ethan survived the night. Sunlight finally crept through the bars, pale and cold. When Ethan climbed down the ladder in the morning, Riker was watching him. "Welcome to hell," Riker said. "Try not to lose yourself." Ethan didn't know then that it was already too late. The second day hit Ethan like a concrete wall. The food smelled like metal trays, sweat, and despair. Men shouted over one another in the cafeteria, voices sharp with dominance, like wolves testing each other's strength. Ethan kept his head down, moving his spoon through the gray mush without tasting it. The trick, he had already learned, was to make yourself invisible. But invisibility in prison was an illusion. Someone was always watching. When he felt a hand grab his shoulder, the tray nearly slipped from his fingers. Ethan turned to find 3 men standing behind him, tattoos crawling up their throats, eyes full of malice. Their leader, a tall blonde nicknamed Cutter, looked him up and down. "New meat," he said, smirking. "Riker's bunkmate, right?" Ethan froze. How did they know that? "He's under my protection," a voice called from across the room. It was calm, almost quiet, but every nearby inmate stopped moving. Riker stood near the far wall, tray untouched, eyes locked on the group. The tension thickened instantly. Cutter's sneer faltered. With a small shrug, he stepped back. "Didn't know he was yours," he muttered before walking away. Ethan's heart pounded. Protection. The words stayed with him all day, twisting in his mind. It wasn't freedom. It was another kind of chain. But when night returned, and they were alone again in the cell, he found himself whispering, "Why did you do that?" Riker didn't look up. "Because you wouldn't last a week without someone claiming you." He said it simply, as if stating a fact. "Now they know not to touch you." "I didn't ask for that," Ethan said, forcing courage he didn't feel. "No one does," Riker replied. Then he leaned closer, eyes shadowed, but not unkind. "You survive by belonging to someone. Better me than them." For a long moment, silence filled the cell. Ethan could hear his own pulse pounding in his throat. He wanted to be angry, but what scared him more was the comfort he felt. Riker wasn't cruel like the others. He was dangerous, yes, but there was something else beneath that. Something that felt like control, purpose. As night wrapped around them again, Ethan lay awake thinking about Riker's words. In this place, nothing was what it seemed. Protection looked like possession. Safety felt like surrender, and he wasn't sure which part of him was already giving in. Days blurred together, measured only by the clang of doors and the shouts of guards. Ethan learned to move through the routine like a machine. Wake up, line up, eat, work, return. But no matter where he went, Riker's presence followed him. It was protection, yes, but it also marked him. Every inmate knew Ethan belonged to someone. No one touched him, no one spoke to him unless Riker allowed it. Safety came with isolation, and isolation came with its own price. During lunch one day, a new inmate was cornered by Cutter's gang near the laundry room. Ethan froze when he saw the beating begin. Fists, blood, laughter feeding the violence. Instinct told him to walk away. But before he could move, Riker stepped forward. He didn't speak. He just grabbed Cutter by the collar and drove him into the wall so hard the sound echoed down the corridor. The room fell silent. Cutter spat blood, but didn't fight back. No one dared. Riker's calm was worse than rage. It was controlled, deliberate, final. When it was over, Riker turned to Ethan. You see, this is what control costs. You either take it or it takes you. That night, Ethan couldn't shake the image of Riker's hand around Cutter's throat. The violence terrified him, but it also revealed something else. Riker didn't enjoy it. He did it because it was the only language the prison respected. Ethan began to realize that Riker wasn't just powerful. He was trapped in the same system, bound by invisible chains stronger than bars. Later, while the cell block slept, Ethan whispered, "Who were you before this place?" Riker looked up from his bunk, eyes dark and unreadable. "Someone who thought he had control. Then life taught me otherwise." Ethan hesitated. "And now?" A faint smile crossed Riker's face. "Now I control what's left." The words stayed between them, heavy and intimate. Ethan felt something shift, something dangerous, but real. The man who had once been his captor in all but name had become the only person he could trust. He didn't know what that meant, whether it was fear, gratitude, or something deeper. But it was growing. For the first time since his sentencing, Ethan didn't dream of escaping. He dreamed of understanding the man who held his safety, and perhaps his heart, within reach. And when morning came, Riker's eyes found his, as if he already knew. Weeks turned into months. Ethan's fear slowly transformed into something more complicated. The prison still terrified him, but within those walls, he had carved out a fragile sense of safety, one built entirely around Riker. They worked side by side in the workshop, shared quiet meals, exchanged few words, yet countless glances. Every moment carried tension, not the kind born of danger, but of something unspoken, suspended between them. One evening, a sudden lockdown shattered the calm. Sirens blared. Lights flashed red across the corridor. The air filled with the sound of boots and shouting. Another fight had broken out in C Block, and rumors spread faster than truth. Ethan crouched in the corner of their cell, heart racing. Through the bars, he heard names being yelled, Cutter among them. Revenge stirred in the chaos. Then, before Ethan could ask what was happening, Riker stood and pulled him toward the corner. "Stay behind me. Whatever happens, you don't move." His voice was rough, controlled, but his eyes burned with worry in a way Ethan had never seen. Minutes stretched into eternity. Shadows moved outside their cell, then stopped. Inmates armed with sharpened pieces of metal crept down the hallway. One whispered Riker's name. Ethan could feel his pulse pounding in his throat. Riker stepped forward, calm as ever. The cell door rattled, but before they could strike, guards stormed in, batons cracking, alarms screaming. The attackers scattered like smoke. When the chaos ended, Riker's hands were trembling. Ethan reached out instinctively, touching his wrist. "You saved me again," Ethan said quietly. "Why?" Riker looked down at him, the usual hardness slipping away. "Because I need to believe I can still protect something worth protecting." His words cut deeper than any blade. For a long time, the two stood there, the noise of the prison fading outside their small cell. Something shifted, something irreversible. When lights dimmed, Ethan sat next to Riker instead of climbing to his bunk. Silence carried more meaning than words. He could feel the warmth of Riker's shoulder against his, and it felt human, real, forbidden. That night, Ethan didn't dream of freedom. He dreamed of what waited beyond fear, a bond neither of them could name, yet both felt, consuming them. And somewhere deep inside, Riker realized that protecting Ethan had turned into something far more dangerous than any fight. Winter crept into the prison through the cracks in the walls. The chill lived in the air, in the bones, in the silence between two men who now barely needed words. Ethan had changed. The fear that once consumed him was replaced by a quiet strength. He had learned how to walk with his head high, how to stare back when threatened, how to survive. But part of that courage came from Riker, his guidance, his protection, his presence. And now, for the first time, Ethan was afraid of what freedom might steal from him. One cold morning, a guard called his name. "Andrews." Appeal granted. "You're going home." Everything froze. The words didn't make sense at first. Ethan blinked, waiting for the guard to repeat them. Riker stood in the corner, unreadable. Home. The word no longer carried the same warmth it once did. In that single moment, the cell that had once been his prison now felt like the only place that made sense, because Riker was there. That night, Ethan sat on the lower bunk, staring at the concrete floor. "You knew this could happen?" he said quietly. Riker didn't look up. "Everyone gets their time. Yours just came sooner." Ethan's throat tightened. "What about you?" Riker gave a small, tired smile. "My time ended a long time ago." The words pierced through him. He wanted to say something, anything, but there was nothing that could change the truth. The silence between them said what neither dared speak aloud. It wasn't about protection anymore. It was about connection, forged where no one believed it could exist. When morning came, Ethan packed what little he had. He turned to Riker once more at the cell door. The guard waited, impatient. Ethan stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "You changed me," he said softly. "You made me stronger." Riker's eyes softened, barely. "Then don't waste that strength out there." They didn't say goodbye. The clang of the door closing behind Ethan carried more finality than words ever could. Weeks later, in the freedom he had once begged for, Ethan stood on an empty street. The world was wide again, but it felt hollow. Every distant sound, every shadow at night, reminded him of the man behind those steel bars, his protector, his prison, his truth. Riker had taught him to survive, but survival, he realized, was not the same as living. And somewhere behind those walls, Riker sat in silence, knowing that the one thing he set free was the only thing that ever made him feel human.